Cuckoo proves that it isn't always easier being an older sibling, and one enduring intense mental health struggles at that. This Tillman Singer written and directed horror film starring the always lovely Hunter Schafer and the always creepy weirdo oddball Dan Stevens is overall a good film with some strong performances from the earlier mentioned Hunter Schafer as the lead character Gretchen, as well as Dan Stevens as the unnerving Herr Koenig, a cool mystery, some creepy images and set pieces, and a wickedly dark sense of humor. There's a lot to like about it. Cuckoo Cuckoo, motherfucker. Yet Cuckoo's most notable positive attribute is its strong emotional core. After all, this film is more about connecting with the audience emotionally rather than logically. In fact, a lot of the behavior or nitty-gritty details regarding the nature of the film's monster aren't really explored, and the aspects that actually are described don't feel all that coherent. Because with this monster, there sometimes just isn't a how or a why. Cuckoo just demands that we accept its bonkers logic like a speaker at CPAC. It's just a movie where some aspects of the narrative aren't really explained all that much or don't make a lick of sense if you really dwell on it. Just like the nature of existence itself. I mean, how can life and the universe itself exist when there has to be a reason for the act of creation itself, whether it be from the universe alone or a deity? I mean, like, come on. How are we even alive? What is reality? Oh well, I'm just gonna play some video games. In other words, Cuckoo operates best when the viewer just accepts the movie's narrative as presented and allows the film to work its emotional magic on us like the cinematic masseuse that it is. Oh yeah. That hits the spot. And in the case of Cuckoo, this means sympathizing with our lead character in the 17-year-old Gretchen and her character progression throughout this film. See, Gretchen and her family, which means her father Louis, stepmother Beth, and her half-sister Alma, no relation, are Americans who are moving to the Bavarian Alps, which for those of you that don't know your geography, is along the Germany and Austria border. I know this because I am cultured. I don't even like Cheese Whiz. The reason why Gretchen and her familial unit relocate to Europe is due to how Louis has been hired by property owner Herr Koenig in order to design a new hotel for his resort, which is a move that Gretchen is really dissatisfied about. After all, Gretchen is grieving after the death of her mother. Her nonverbal disabled sister Alma understandably receives more attention from Gretchen's dad and stepmother due to Alma's disability, and Gretchen is essentially ignored, seeing as she has to live in a country where she doesn't know anyone. It's just rough for her. And that's all even before Gretchen realizes that there is something deeply wrong with this locale. That there is a monster stalking the wilderness surrounding the hotel and hunting people, and that Herr Koenig is very suspicious, because Dan Stevens be Dan Skeevy, which is an art form that he has perfected over the years.
Do you wanna buy anything for their fellas?
Do I look like I'd like to buy something for their fellas?
And unfortunately for Gretchen, no one believes her when she claims that something is clearly wrong. Kind of like how no one believes it's actually not butter is actually not butter. What a f***ing shock! Furthermore, Gretchen's father and stepmother cast doubt on her claims of foul play or something supernatural occurring, mostly because of Gretchen's turbulent and grief-stricken mental state, and thus causing her dad and stepmother to view Gretchen as a problem child. This allows Gretchen to be very sympathetic. After all, Gretchen is the only person who sees the nightmarish clusterfuck of a scenario that this shit show is. In fact, she finds Dan Stevens' Herr Koenig to be untrustworthy, yet no one believes her because they assume that Gretchen is lashing out and rebelling due to her grief. Because being chased by a humanoid monster figure is just something that every teenage girl experiences sometime in their lives. It's just a phase. And for lack of a better word, Gretchen's parental figures believe that she has gone cuckoo, thus ensuring that we, the audience, empathize with her. Even though there are aspects of Gretchen's behavior that are very unbecoming. In fact, Gretchen often takes her frustrations out on her little half-sister Alma, which even though yes, Alma receives the lion's share of the parental attention, much to Gretchen's detriment, that is not Alma's fault. After all, Alma is just a sibling that desires to be emotionally close to a big sister that she adores, which is Gretchen, and the fact that Alma receives extra attention because she's much younger and has a speaking disability means that Alma shouldn't be blamed here, because Alma isn't the reason why their dad Louis is neglecting Gretchen. That abdication of responsibility falls on Louis, because truly he should be emotionally and physically supporting Gretchen during this hard time and believe her when she says that something is very, very wrong about this nightmare scenario. But then again, it is a very normal occurrence for a teenage girl to be threatened by Dan Stevens. It's just a phase.
Sammy, those are onions.
So yes, Gretchen's characterization and development grants Cuckoo some narrative weight. In fact, the character allows the audience to emotionally connect with the events of the film, even despite how fantastical so much of it is. Even despite all of the unexplained details. You know, because terrifying monster lady. And Gretchen's experience throughout the movie is relatable for many of us who have experienced something similar. By which I mean the act of being a mentally struggling kid who is in much emotional anguish, yet is overlooked by their parental figures. You know, that's the part that's relatable, not the whole witnessing a supernatural event, which I guess that can happen somewhere. Probably in Nebraska. In other words, it is Cuckoo's human element that resonates with the audience. And I'm one of those folks that can relate to Gretchen's arc. Because truly, I was also a troubled teen who experienced personal internal hardship, but had to bottle it up inside like an emotional Coca-Cola mixed with Pepto-Bismol. You know, because someday, that shit's gonna come out. While sure, unlike Gretchen, I wasn't grieving a parental death, and my parents really did the best they could, it honestly doesn't change the fact that I was in a lot of emotional anguish during my teenage years. Like I was living with undiagnosed obsessive-compulsive disorder and unable to control and stop dwelling on dark, twisted, and bloody intrusive thoughts, and to a lesser extent couldn't find any enjoyment in entertainment because my mind nitpicked everything to the point of making me anxious. And then there was my intense gender dysphoria on top of that. Gender dysphoria, where I was uncomfortable with my own body as it changed during masculine puberty, even though I wasn't aware that my feelings on the matter signified that my gender identity was actually female. And unfortunately, I endured this torment alone. After all, my parents were getting a divorce at the time, and my sister gave birth via a teen pregnancy, meaning that my nephew and older sister understandably received more attention than me, even though I was also really struggling, even though I was silently suffering in the background. In other words, I had something in common with Gretchen, though to be clear, the difference here is that Gretchen's dad and stepmom deserve blame, whereas my parents don't require the same culpability, but it is worth noting the commonalities because both Gretchen and I were both in distress to the point of potentially holding it against our siblings, or in my case, sibling and nephew, even though that pain, of course, wasn't their fault. They were not to blame. Additionally, it's also worth noting that Gretchen is played by Hunter Schafer, who is a transgendered woman. While sure, this factoid isn't relevant to Cuckoo's narrative, and it is possible that Schafer was playing a cisgender girl, seeing as Schafer has in the past said that she doesn't always desire to play trans characters, a trans actress being in this movie does add one more element of common ground between this film and myself, thus allowing me to be enthralled with the story even more than I already was. So to conclude, Cuckoo clicked with me through its emotional storytelling. While some might question the narrative logistics and the lack of information or clarification in the film at various instances, I can't help but believe that that perspective misses Cuckoo's point. If anything, it's a critique that undervalues Cuckoo's abundance of heart that the film clearly contains through both its relatability and overall rewarding narrative progression, all the way through to its satisfying climax that eventually addresses Gretchen's issues, both by acknowledging the pain that Gretchen is in and the shitty way in which she treats her younger sister Alma. Cuckoo just essentially has a strong narrative and thematic core. And for that, I really enjoyed Cuckoo. If anything, I'm basically Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs for it, because it's a movie that aims for your heart rather than your brain, and I'm of the opinion that that is a more than valid focal point for a movie. After all, good art allows us to feel things. It makes us realize that we are human and not psychopathic axe murderers or chihuahuas. And in terms of Cuckoo, that means that this is a movie that we can connect with. A film that allows us to empathize with its main character Gretchen. Because while Cuckoo's horror elements are fantastical, the human and empathetic elements are not. That part of the movie is very real.